We estimate that between 3 to 6 billion has been spent on the war on drugs, but it actually hasn't reduced crop cultivation. But also I think the key thing is that it's really having such a devastating impact on people's lives and resulting in such huge human rights violations that really it needs to be completely abandoned.
There's a prevailing narrative in global discussions on drugs that see drugs as a mechanism for fueling conflict. And in this project, we want to challenge that narrative a little bit because the reality, as we're finding from our research, is a lot more complicated.
Myanmar and Afghanistan together produce almost all of the world's illicit opium, whereas Colombia is the world's largest producer of coca, which goes into producing cocaine.
One of the other commonalities between the three countries is that they all have a long history of violence and civil war.
These three countries are also going through some form of water peace transition or attempted transition.
I don't think you can understand the dynamics of the conflict and the legacies, how they are going to affect people, unless you really understand the role that these illicit economies, and especially drugs, are playing.
The primary focus in our project is around kind of three core aims. The first one, ultimately, is to produce really rigorous, high-quality research.
The drugs policy field is highly politicised and contested, and the evidence base that we're drawing upon around drugs issues is very, very patchy and uneven and very, very politicised and unreliable. And there's a real need to generate new and independent and rigorously generated evidence to inform policy and practice.
In this project, what happens is that we partner academics with development practitioners, with researchers on the ground, to gather the voices from the borderlands, to gather the views and perspectives from different communities who are affected directly. And this is particularly becoming more and more important because we have witnessed, at least in Afghanistan over the past 16 to 17 years, that the alternative livelihoods, the kind of different war on drug, for example, approaches, they have not been helpful. So the top-down approaches so far proved to be really a big failure.
The second key part of this project is really a focus on building global research networks and strengthening partnerships.
Our aim is to help support and build a new generation of researchers on drugs issues, and that will be a lasting legacy for this project.
The third strand of the project is trying to think of ways of using that research to have an impact, whether that is on policy or wider public discourses around drugs.
In many cases, issues related to drugs, to the war on drugs, to the relationship between drugs and insurgencies are not only about policy, but also about politics.
Of course, we need to tell policymakers what we are finding when we are doing this research, because this evidence and these understandings should inform how policies are designed and implemented. But second, and perhaps more importantly, I think we have to communicate to the broader public what we are finding when we do this research. First, the people who are directly affected, and second, the general public vote. And unless public opinion changes and they form their opinions based on real facts and what the evidence is telling us, they are not going to demand change from policymakers.
One of our starting points for this research is that voices from the global south, the drug-producing countries, the consumers of drugs in these countries, are often missing from these debates.
The voices from this borderland, their voices are not heard yet.
So we are working across each of the countries, Afghanistan, Myanmar, and Colombia, working particularly with local artists in building their capacity to be able to tell these stories both to local audiences and to international audiences.
Our research is aiming to understand better the practices of these both producers and consumers and people living in these border regions, but also to amplify and give voice to these people, because we think they have very important things to say about how we understand drugs economies and also how we can play a role in helping transform them.
So our ideas and expectations are quite high, but we set the bar high in order to be able to deliver something good.